as well.
Oh, Councillor Fletcher, sorry, we didn't spot you.
I have three questions. One is, regardless of where we end up with a port cruise liner terminal, is that open at all times when there are no cruise liners, and it's partially open when there are cruise liners there?
Madam Chair, it's probably a mix of some of those things. So there would be, as there is currently in Queen's Wharf and Prince's Wharf, there are areas that become open when there is no cruise liner there. For example, the provisioning areas, the custom bonded areas for luggage and those sorts of things. There would be purpose-built facilities like there are in Shed 10, for example, that it doesn't make a lot of sense to be available to the public at all times. But as you'd be aware, Shed 10 is available for events and those sorts of things when there isn't a cruise liner in town. So those opportunities will still exist.
Okay. Second question is, just could you, someone please explain to me, have we approved the extension of Housley Wharf already? Because that seems to be sneaking in under the radar there. Have we already approved that?
Sorry, the extension of?
Housley Wharf? Housley Wharf, however you're going to pronounce it?
No, Madam Chair, that's it's in every one of the options as a way to address the growth in that sort of tourist boat area and also the recreational boating area and the super yacht area, which is further to the west, if you look on there.
My question was, have we already given approval for that?
No, they're not.
Because there's no discussion about that at all. It's kind of sneaking in there under the radar.
There's
anyway,
no
discussion and no approval, thank you. And this is Mr. Blakely. If we approved option 4, and I want to go to slide 14 if it will be brought up, please, on that presentation. Can that be brought up again? Under the wording of the resolution we've got there on number 1, does that mean we are endorsing all of the words in this report? Because I, like Mr. Taiperi, have a real problem with basically two statements in there, and they only involve a few words. Page 14. So, on that left-hand column at the bottom, it basically, it says replacement freight berth. I mean, whereas it could say replacement freight berth if required. And then on the right-hand side under port operational, I have a problem with one word, which is will. Extension of water structures and reclamation will be required. Instead of it could be may be required. So I've got a real problem, because I'm behind this Captain Cook extension, and I like this option, but I really have a struggle if that means we're endorsing those words. Could you clarify that?
I think, as the Chair explained at the start, the intent of her resolution up here is simply to give officers a steer that we're to further develop this option and report back on all these issues. So that doesn't involve endorsing the option, or it doesn't involve endorsing particular words in this slide. It's simply to now focus on that option and come and report back on the issues.
Okay, and that's likewise so in the main report itself on clause 14, which Mr. Filipino was referring to, I think it was. Again, the word will require modification in addition to berths and storage space instead of the word may. Just, you know, I just sort of, does get down to one word often in these things, and I really don't want to vote for something that actually has the word will in it.
So, Madam Chair, I suggest that what you are voting for is simply the resolution. That if we could go back to the resolution, can we get that on the screen?
This is a start of a 10, and I think, Councillor, you're wise to make sure that we aren't being led by the nose into something we're not going to like when we reach it. We need to be really clear and reassured that we're narrowing down, and we're looking at an option that is deserving of more exploration. what that report is not an implementation plan and it's not a doing plan. It's saying this is the kind of option that we're interested in. And we just need to make that on public record and be clear about it.
So it is on public record and everyone's agreeing it's not necessarily a will, it may be.
Yep.
So that is an really important distinction.
Yep.
And if I wasn't comforted, I would not be voting for
Yeah.
this.
And as you'll remember, when the councillors were briefed on this, it was made absolutely clear that it lacked integrity not to have the Bledisloe, possible need for Bledisloe extension if these wharves were taken. Whether it ever happens or not is beside the point, but that needs to be honestly, put out there. Otherwise, we're, drawing wool over people's eyes, which we're not prepared to do. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Just a question around something that was brought up around sightlines down the harbour. Would somebody be able to tell me, my understanding is that if Bledisloe was reclaimed, it'd still be about 90 metres shorter than Ferguson. So would, I'm just wondering, how would sightlines be encroached if we've already got Ferguson in the way? And Bledisloe, if it was reclaimed, wouldn't go beyond that, or it's actually going to be shorter?
Madam Chair, I guess sightlines depend where you stand. But your comment around the extent to which the reclamation would extend into the harbour, my understanding is that the Ferguson extends, or has a narrower gap across the harbour than any of the conversations that have been had around reclamation on Bledisloe. And I don't know what that reclamation would be, if there is any, to what extent, but I am, I understand
That
it would,
answers it. So
I
it
understand that the largest
still wouldn't go
extent-
beyond the actual longer Ferguson wharf?
No.
No, thank you.
Okay, so I've got Councillor Lee Fletcher Penrose.
Yes,
We just need to do, just hang on, Councillor. I'm just reminding people, it's coming up for 2:45. We do need to make the decision today because of the constraints of mediation. We do need to decide C3 today. We've got the 3 items to decide in confidence, and some of them include people who want to speak to those. We also have what I imagine people will want to talk to in reasonable detail, the Aotea precinct development. So remembering this is the start of this process, we're not resolving it all today. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, we have been, or we're halfway through actually, a very long and exacting LTP process, and you recall late last year the Auditor General the Auditor General, Madam Chair, spoke to us about the importance of linking costs and funding in the LTP. And so my question here is, from my experience and correspondence going back to 2007 from Auckland City, there could be significant costs involved in acquiring and destroying, indeed, a wharf, constructing a very long extension, and then constructing a cruise ship terminal again. And I wonder whether these costs are going to be attributed in the LTP, or what is the council going to do about the costs and the funding?
Madam Chair, that'll be the topic of a further report back to this committee once we understand the nature of the exercise with a little more certainty. We would then be able to give consideration to where the funding might be coming from.
But surely, in going for option 4, you were guided by some rudimentary cost-benefit idea, or not?
Madam Chair, that's true, but my answer still holds. We'll come back with the detail. I can't provide the detail at this time because that information isn't, and we haven't sought where the various funding sources might come from.
Or-
Clearly, that makes no real sense until we get a steer from you as to what you want to do.
Or how much it is. And Madam Chair, therefore, I commend your recommendation that this be postponed to another day. Thank you.
Councillor, we're not postponing it for another day. We're actually just embarking now on a process of
We're not making a
working
decision on it
through-
today, right?
No. Well, we're saying that we want more work done
Exactly.
on option 4.
Exactly.
We might be
Like costs.
staggering towards making a decision, which would be quite a terrifying thing. Councillor
Like
Fletcher.
costs.
Is there still questions, ma'am?
Yeah, I'm hoping it's questions. I have one more speak. Oh no, Councillor Fletcher's the last questioner, and then we're moving on to the recommendation, which hopefully Councillor Penrose wishes to speak to the recommendation.
So my
Councillor Fletcher.
question is probably very similar to that of Councillor Clow, and this is the question that I was going to ask you before we adjourn for lunch. In the event, because it's difficult where we're dealing with different chunks of this on different agenda items, and to try and get that integration, as Rika said, is really, really important. So the question that I was going to pose, and it's changed in part now with your chair's recommendations, was for officers when they put forward recommendations, and the recommendations from the officer was endorse option 4, and I was going to ask our chief legal counsel how officers might interpret that endorsement. Does that then preclude an opportunity to look at other things? Now, you've been at pains today to actually clarify that this is first step on the journey, and the wording up here is giving comfort to some. But then what is the weighting of this report? And I guess it's how the officers can interpret this, and that we are being clear in the direction that we're giving officers, so that everybody knows they're on the same page, we're dealing with the same information. So I don't want to put Catherine on the spot right at this moment as to how we would have interpreted the recommendations had they gone ahead. But Rick, could you explain to me, from an officer's perspective, what you will take away from today's meeting, and does that prevent you coming back with another option in the future if, when you do all this other work, there are barriers, gaps? So Rick, how will you interpret this?
Okay, Madam Chair, what I take from this, well, assuming that the recommendation passes, is that we will go away and look in more detail at option 4. It doesn't preclude the opportunity to go to other options, or in fact even options that haven't been considered at this point. So we see this as a steer from you that you see some value in option 4, but clearly that value has to be subject to further analysis. So it doesn't prevent us going back to any one of the other options.
Thank you. I'm really comforted by that, thank you.
If other clever stuff makes more sense, we can do that.
Oh,
Councillor Casey.
I want to speak. Are we know on the?
Oh.
It's not a question.
We are at the talking to the recommendations. I've got Councillor Penrose, then Councillor Casey.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying.
Councillor Penrose, did you
Yes,
wish to
thank
speak
you,
to the
Madam Chair.
recommendation?
Sorry, I thought
Change
I was
the
still
tempo.
finishing off there. So, yeah, Madam Chair, look, I think a lot of it's been summed up by the Mayor earlier on before his departure, and like myself, I welcome this report, and Rick and the team, I think you've done an outstanding job to date with keeping us brief, but also the work behind the scenes. And I really welcome and appreciate the document you sent the other day through in regards to the stats across the region, what we've been asking for. And it's mind-boggling when you do see these stats, what they actually deliver back to the Auckland economy. And to me, that's why I'm sitting around this table, to deliver outcomes. Whilst it's frustrating sitting here for the whole day, and no doubt into the evening now, frustrating. But if I look at it, Madam Chair, that what it does deliver back, but in particular, the world's a changing place, and Auckland's moving at a rate of knots that we can't keep up with. And it's a bit like the cruise ships, you know, the length of them are doubling in size. the capacity with passengers, no doubt like our container ships, and we've got to adapt to that, whether we like it or not. You know, if we want to keep up with the rest of the world and be an international port, we've got to be there for it. And you made a comment, Rick, in regards to the changeover port. You know, to me, that's welcoming news. That's something that, you know, we should be relishing, and rather than go to other parts of the Pacific, that the people of Auckland, and I think also the mere fact that if we look at the return, well, the dollar figure as to what the ports were worth 4 years ago to what they're worth today is outstanding. And we went some challenging and rocky times a couple of years back, battling there with Tauranga. And then, of course, the dividends and returns back to all Aucklanders, you know, is outstanding. So I want to acknowledge that. But, you know, I've heard the pros and cons of cruise ships and what they deliver. And that's hence why I keep pushing for this, you know, so that I can go back out to the people of Auckland and say, well, hey, listen, these are the facts and what we're doing. Again, Auckland Council, sadly we don't, Madam Chair, get that good news story out there, and we've got to continue to push those good news stories. Hey, I get that there's some concern regarding how much we encroach into the harbour, but we'll walk through that process, and I'm sure we'll come to a conclusion eventually that hopefully suits most to deliver some good outcomes. You know, we've heard stories about being a car park on the waterfront. Well, reality is Kiwis like driving cars, and whether it's petrol cars now or whether it's electric cars into the future, there'll be a market for cars coming into New Zealand, because they won't be all built in New Zealand. So, you know, and Kiwis, whilst, you know, we're pushing PT, the Kiwis still like driving their motor vehicles, and the average household has 2, if not 3. So, you know, I think we've got to get that into perspective. So, Madam Chair, I'm not going to keep relitigating what the Mayor's already said. That's my views on it, and I'll shut my mouth and carry on.
Thank you, Councillor Penrose.
I'll be supporting their recommendation.
Councillor Casey.
Well, I've got a contrary view. This superliner's trundling on, and it's called the Titanic, and I want to give you a history lesson. There's a couple of people in this room will remember it, and you would probably read about it because Bernard covered it. And
George was there.
Yeah, no, but he didn't have a part to play in the decision-making process. It was called the Waterfront Stadium Debate. And it was in this room 9 years ago, and it was one of the most bloodletting debates I've ever been engaged in. And I lost. So the Auckland City Council agreed to it, and the day was saved by Mike Lee and the Auckland Regional Council, who unanimously opposed it. Why was there so much passion aroused through the Waterfront Stadium? You're not listening to what the people said this morning. The people of Auckland don't want to give up any more of their harbour. And so this, you've tidied up the words, but it's trundling on. You need to listen to that. No more reclamation. Yes, we are. It's still there. It's still there. So, what do I want to say? Rick, you talked about consensus among the council family. We got consensus this morning too, from a whole range of important stakeholders who came here and said, don't do it, we don't want reclamation. You heard from the 2 stakeholding boards, one of whom was misrepresented, saying exactly the same thing.
Like a growl, wasn't it?
No reclamation. You heard from Dr. Cayford over there. No reclamation. Joel was on the ARC at that time. He remembers the blood on the floor. That's the issue. Where's the public voice? Where's the public voice in all of this? It's not down the line when we get to resource consents. It's not there. It's now, and that's what Joel was talking about. Wellington did it right because the public came with them. The public's nowhere at the moment. Nowhere. We're the public, and that's why I'm speaking the way I am, and I'm not supporting any of these. The most important thing I heard this morning was put people ahead of cruise ships, put people ahead of ports. That's why Wellington have got the waterfront that the Deputy Mayor ran up and down and came back full of it. That's what we want, and the only way we'll get that is with the people of Auckland behind us, and that's not, there's no mention of that up there. We all heard it and thought it was a great idea. Well, why don't we have a C, that we implement a process whereby, what was it called? What was the thing called? The waterfront?
Aberration.
Joel, what was it
Well, hang on, Councillor. In B, can we just keep with the recommendations in B the involvement of stakeholder groups. We're starting this, councillor. It's up to us to design that stakeholder process. No one's excluding that. I'm pretty enthused about it. So,
Well,
you know,
we'll put up a C then.
back to you.
Put up a C.
What's in B?
What's in B?
The involvement of stakeholder groups. Okay, why don't we, councillor Casey,
Well,
let you
actually,
just...
no, it's not stakeholder groups.
Public.
It's the public.
Well,
It's the public.
that's-
Auckland.
we
It's
can-
like
we can
Torres,
dance
you
on the
know?
head of a pin.
It's their
Okay,
waterfront.
okay,
It's our
President,
waterfront. We want a
just
say in
the-
it.
We hear you. My recommendation was that this council actually gathers together and designs a really good process, using some of the Wellington experience, using some of the people who came and spoke to us this morning. Why don't we actually do that? That's what this is referring to. You might not like the words, that's what it is. Councillor Darby.